Joseph, thanks again for accepting our invitation. I will leave to you the clicker, and I'm more than curious in listening the kind of gift you will give to us in this speech. So thank you again.
Claudio, speaking of gifts, I'd like to give you this gift. This is for you and the observatory team, many of you who we've been working together for a number of years, and I really want to thank you for the opportunity to bring Office Shock to the observatory. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. So with those thank yous, I want to thank everyone for coming and to take this opportunity to reflect. We are going to be reflecting on the future of the workplace, and the future of the workplace is the focus of my new book, which is called Office Shock. And Office Shock is a very good example of applied foresight. And because this is a very sophisticated audience, many of you are in the consulting industry, many of you are in organizations where you're responsible for some kind of design work. Yeah, is that fair to say? Did I miss anyone? So what I would like to do is to use this opportunity to reflect on how applied foresight can be used either with clients, and I'm going to say this is the consulting side and this is the industry side, either with your clients to be able to help them accelerate this transition to a more sustainable future, or on the organizational side, to be able to accelerate some of the business initiatives that surely you are designing. If I think about my career over 25 years, I began as a practicing architect. So I was actually a workplace architect, and in 2000 I left after designing the headquarters of AOL Time Warner in Paris. Some of you might remember that company, AOL Time Warner, and all the excitement about that. I then left and went into Deloitte and spent 15 years at Deloitte actually doing business transformation, which we eventually called digital transformation. About 5 years ago, before the pandemic, I left and joined the Institute for the Future. And I have to say, again, amongst colleagues, that bringing futures into design opportunities, into transformation opportunities, has been a game changer, certainly for my practice and my learning and development as someone who is very passionate about helping organizations accelerate the transition to more sustainable practices. That's my passion, and I think we should all ideally share some of that passion. And that's why I like to refer to myself as a futures architect, inspired by the Buckminster Fuller quote, which is actually on the window of the Institute for the Future's offices in Palo Alto. Okay, so let's use this as an opportunity to reflect. I'm going to share with you the key forecasts and signals that are the basis for our forecasts, or what are also known as scenarios. And I'm going to share those with you, again, reflecting on how might you be able to use those ideas and this approach with either your clients or your stakeholders within organizations. All right, pandemic, the world disrupted. I certainly enjoyed having the opportunity to work from a home office because I was traveling a lot and I had a nice office at home. But that's not the case for everyone. However, what we all learned in the last 2.5 years is that work is happening in a number of different places. It's still happening in office buildings. And some of organizations, or many of the organizations, are now actually putting into practice work policies. Policies that answer the question, you have to be in the office 3 days a week, and you can work anywhere you want 2 days a week, which gives flexibility to work in a home office. It gives flexibility to work in a networked office, My favorite example of a networked office is Starbucks. And Starbucks was transformative in turning a cafe into an office. Now, we can argue about the quality of the coffee, but we're not here to talk about that. The fact is that now that Wi-Fi is in every coffee house, that is a networked office. And clearly, we have co-working spaces, WeWork, hotels, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, work is happening at customers and suppliers. Okay? That is also increased with the use of technology, the speed of technology, with 5G coming out, et cetera, et cetera. And we refer to all of this as the Officeverse. Now, clearly, we're inspired by the metaverse. We're also tacking onto a bit of a buzzword, verse at the end. But we do really think it's important for everyone to think about working in an Officeverse, that menu of options that are here and will continue to evolve. And we'll talk a little bit more about how working in virtual reality as a signal is giving us an indication about what the Officeverse is evolving into. And the question of the future of the workplace is really what drove our research. But when we were researching, we also acknowledged that, sure, the pandemic was a shock, particularly in the beginning. Do I go to the office or not? How are we going to work? How are we going to connect? And I have to say, in my many years working in Italy, I've come to value the culture of being together, having those social interactions. That's really powerful, and I think a very important catalyst for the impact that Italian culture, particularly the design culture, has made on the world. However, the World Economic Forum, right before the Davos meeting last week, came out with the top risks. Number one, failure to mitigate climate change. That's kind of obvious, right? Number two, I think for us, professionals, either consultants or in organizations, is more important. Number two is the failure of climate change adaptation. Climate change adaptation. That means making the changes necessary to contribute to climate change. And organizations are essential. And I would argue that the service industry, particularly consulting industry, is a willing conspirator or a willing contributor. So I'll leave that out there. So we're in a very disrupted world. You remember George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, BLM, Me Too. There's a lot of social change happening. And obviously, as we speak, we don't know what's going to happen in Ukraine now that tanks are going to be sent from European and American countries into the battlefield. We don't know what's going to happen. Will it have an impact on the energy crisis? Yeah. Will it have an impact on supply chain? Yeah. Will there be a threat of more warfare, cyber warfare? Yeah. Nuclear. Who knows? We don't know. So the reason I mention that is if you feel like you've got a workplace policy and you've overcome office shock, I'm here to tell you as a futurist, don't be complacent. Don't be complacent, because the shocks are going to continue. So this is a great opportunity, now that all of these shocks are coming together, which we refer to collectively as office shock, to think differently about the future. That's what office shock is all about. And clearly, we are going to continue as designers and as a recovering architect, continue to build. Okay? In Bill Gates' book, How to Avoid a Climate Disaster, written before the pandemic, his forecast was that we will be building globally the equivalent of New York City for the next 40 years every month. Okay? Every month. So you can imagine what that means for the construction industry, the transportation industry, for consumption, for production. Okay? Even if you cut that forecast in half because of a pandemic, probably more likely because of the war, We also don't know what's going to happen in China, with Taiwan. That's huge. So we all have an enormous responsibility to think differently or to influence or to, what I like to say, architect a different future. Okay, so as a futurist, we think future back. I'm simplifying the approach. How many of you have had some exposure with strategic foresight or futures thinking? If you haven't, I highly recommend. There are a number of sources to get that. I'm not going to sell the Institute for the Futures programs. However, they are really good. We did actually partner with Polydesign last fall, and we delivered a course called Designing Sustainable Futures. Happy to share more resources because, again, as consultants and designers, I believe futures is a game changer. I appreciate design thinking, but futures is a game changer, and I hope to convince you of that and showing you how we apply this approach to Office Shock. Okay, so I've told you about Office Shock. We've seen that the world is VUCA. Everyone is familiar with that term, and this is, in our view, the time to fundamentally think about the way people work. This is the great opportunity. And the common story is that we've got this taken care of. Yes, Office Shock was an operational challenge. We actually had our facilities team or our HR team come up with a new workplace policy. And it looks great because we had some internal designers working on it or we had an agency working on it. It's really good. The text is compelling. That is not the right story to have if we want to influence the future. A better story is that Office Shock is an opportunity to reconsider how do we work, not just where do we work, and more importantly, why do we work? So what is your Office Shock story? And that was our intention in the book, is to actually share some stories. Now the stories that we share, again, a story is another way of describing a forecast or a scenario. And what we did in the book was include a story about place and time. Okay? We have to include that because that's where people's minds are. Thinking present forward, do I need to go to the office? How am I going to get everybody back into the office? However, we know that that's also dependent on organizational structures. So we also identified as part of our stories or our scenarios the importance of being agile. How do you find flexibility in organizational models when you're not in the office together? Because if you're online, that opens up. I can send an email to the CEO if I want to. I can send an email to a partner if I want to. So we're very connected about agility, but we also know that technology is playing an important role. And I'm guessing, because of the title of this session, Metaverse, that is also top of mind. I have to say, though, that I am not a techno-optimist. A techno-optimist thinks that technology is going to solve our systemic problems. And that influenced the other 4 scenarios or stories. We wrote a story about purpose and the importance of purpose in identifying how that future might be different. We also addressed the outcomes, specifically the economic outcomes. We do need to have that difficult conversation about business models if we are to take advantage of this great opportunity that Office Shock has provided. WEF, yes, we need to talk about climate. However, we should all be acutely aware of the global crisis that's happening around climate. And lastly, it does come down to people. And that may be a sentence that you've heard many times, and it's always important to repeat it. It is a little bit more complicated than just a simple sentence. So let's take a look at these stories from the future. These are really the framework that we use to create a good understanding of what are the choices that leaders, that organizations, and ideally communities need to consider in accelerating a transition to a more sustainable future. Now, I'm going to go through each of these relatively quickly because I do want to give us opportunity to have the conversation and to reflect. Okay? So, we imagine a world where offices are motivated by a shared sense of purpose. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about these illustrations, because these illustrations were done in a manner to get stories of different futures from young, underrepresented artists. So this illustration here of a future with more purpose is called Sharing Navigational Stars, and it was created by Katia Herrera from the Dominican Republic. Now, in the book, and even on our website, you can actually get the color images. And again, our intention is, as designers, to encourage people to visualize those futures. That's a very powerful way to get that level of engagement, to understand what might that future look like, so that we can then have a conversation about your future versus another future, or everyone's different future. And that also is inspired by the work that Roberto Faganti, who I'm sure you've interacted with, and the rest of the team have been focusing on this importance of images. So the question that comes up here is, can an organization provide more purpose? Well, you're going to have to navigate a spectrum. Okay? And in our book, we refer to spectrum thinking. That's based on my co-author's previous book, which I do recommend, called Full Spectrum Thinking. This is not an either-or. It's not an either-or that you can fulfill your own individual purpose, or you're only going to give purpose to the collective. Okay? I spent many years in Israel and actually spent time on a kibbutz. That's where it was only about a collective purpose. Okay, 100 years ago, there were about 85 or 90 what are called kibbutzim in Israel. Today, there are 2, because they didn't find that right balance. I know in Italy, there's a rich history around cooperatives. Okay? Those are all going to be challenged as we move towards more sustainable futures. But let's also just take a quick look at some of the signals. TOMS you should be familiar with. 7th generation cleaning products, which again is very focused on a clear purpose. There's another really good example. There's a co-op ride sharing that takes the Uber model and changes the exploitative platforms of a gig economy into a cooperative. So that's a great example of something happening with shared purpose, but also a shared economic model. Keep your eyes out for EcoWatch. They are tracking greenwashing. If your company is on their list, that's going to have an impact on your brand. It's certainly going to have an impact on new generation or younger generation consumers of your products. And there is increased interest in getting B certified. So those are just a couple of examples or signals of companies with more purpose. Now, sustainability, we've got to imagine a way to balance production with consumption. Yes, we do have to address the spectrum of net zero to regenerative, and we actually began at net zero because we know we need to be at net zero. We are being aspirational to look at regenerative, and this illustration from a solar punk artist based in Belgium, he calls it a regenerative office. And regenerative changes everything about a business model, because the business model is really going to be focused on local production, on local supply chains. So that's a very different kind of organizational model. So thinking about what might be that future that you're going to be able to make an impact on climate, but at the same time change your business model is going to be very important. And as a concrete example, how many of you are familiar with the Jeans redesign project? Oh, wonderful. So it's always nice to bring a signal that is new, particularly to this group of designers. Check out the Jeans redesign project from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. You can go online, there's a great video. What is this? It's the design for a pair of circular jeans. How many of you have little rivets on your jeans? That makes them unrecyclable, okay? Even if you wanted to recycle the material. I think I've got a little bit of latex in it, so that wouldn't be recyclable as well. It's easy to design a pair of recyclable jeans. The challenge is, does that work? No. The challenge to get all of the manufacturers, all of the producers, all of the consumer-facing companies to agree on this. And that's what was so exciting about this project. As a signal, they were able to agree on standards so that they could begin not only producing but also selling jeans that are recyclable. So again, an important signal of this topic of climate. Technology, you're all excited to spend a couple of hours together exploring what the metaverse might look like, and clearly there is going to be a lot of augmentation, extension of officing, enhancing our abilities. And this illustration from an artist in Germany, embodied augmentation, actually doesn't look too dissimilar to what probably many of you are seeing about ChatGPT and specifically DALL-E 2 AI art generators. So this spectrum, again, this choice that you'll want to be considering is between, well, what do we do as humans and what do we want technology to do? And we're going to ending up in the middle. And as an example, non-stop, at least in my Medium feed, how to use ChatGPT. How many of you have used ChatGPT? Okay, a couple. How many of you used DALL-E 2, Midjourney? Okay. I would say by Monday, everyone has to be able to raise their hand. Okay? As a design community, you've got to be using these tools. And this is one reason to use them. So I pulled this off the internet, AI-generated UI graphic designs from Linus Eckenstein. Okay? This is a game changer for the design profession. I'm going to share with you at the end how I think this is also a great opportunity. But when we think about a future that will have more meaning, more impact, more purpose, we do need to consider how technology is going to enable that. We spoke about the Officeverse, and this is actually my using Midjourney, and the challenge here is to find that balance. That balance has to happen in a moderated way, because this article from Slate, January 17th, is a wonderful example of a good idea gone wrong. So Accenture, I believe it was in the US, Accenture bought about 100 Oculus sets and handed them out. And you can see the headline, "The often maddening, always surreal experience of work meetings in VR." Okay. How many of you have used VR in a significant way? Okay, again, I do encourage you all to do that. I'm sure you will all be inspired through this observatory to go out and try it out. VR is incredible for immersive experiences, for immersive learning, for immersive gaming. But clearly, this experience says that there are limitations to it. So understanding the technology will be important to understand what the limitations are, just like it's important to understand OpenAI, the ChatGPT, or any of the AI art generators that are out there. All right, the last one on clarity. This is, I believe, such an important consideration in looking at how might we transition to a more sustainable future. Yeti Iglesias from Mexico made this image called braided agility. And in this chapter, we refer a lot to a wonderful book from a former colleague of mine from the Center of Creative Leadership that is called Braided Organizations. And the idea of a braid is getting that agility, getting that resilience to be ready for whatever shocks may come, whatever the VUCA world is going to bring. And that's that stable structure versus shape-shifting structure. A stable structure is an org chart. A shape-shifting structure is an agile team network, okay? And I want to share with you a signal. This is a prototype that the Institute for the Future developed with a startup, which brings together a lot of these topics, particularly looking at the importance of agility.
Same room.
In this new world of work, having and applying a network perspective is fundamental and success critical for our leaders, our team, and our people. Everyone will have access to their own and their team networks, to extract intelligence, to accelerate their goals and performance, to align it to their aspiration and strength, and to develop their career.
Our first experiments in this space have already yielded incredible insights, but we're just getting started. We're particularly interested in exploring and leveraging these kinds of embodied computing interfaces that utilize our spatialized intelligence, particularly in socially collaborative tools.
So that's actually from my colleague Toshi Hu, who leads our emerging technologies group at IFTF. All right, so you might have caught the first statement. We need to be thinking systemically. So in Office Shock, we have these 7 spectrums, and we brought them all together in a systemic way, but a visual metaphor, which we refer to as the mixing board. And again, we are not saying that you have to make a choice between individual or collective purpose, between human and technology. But you've got to open up space for conversations to be able to calibrate those. And that calibration, we felt, was going to be enhanced by having this idea of a mixing board metaphor. So for those of you who are musically inclined, ideally, we're starting to make a different kind of music. And we believe making that different kind of music, finding the harmonies, finding the dissonance, being able to synchronize these stories will be fundamental in taking this great opportunity to create better futures for working and living. So I'll leave you with a reflective question. How will you synchronize your stories, your own individual stories, where you are in your personal lives, where you are in your career, with your organizational stories, that direction, that objective, that strategy, the products and services that you're offering, the customers that you're supporting and providing to. And ultimately, we are lacking, particularly in the West, a sense of community. And we really do believe that Office Shock is opening up an opportunity to strengthen community. And we see some signals of that as well, particularly in rooftop gardens in Brooklyn, for example. We see community happening in other areas in a lot of the regenerative design work, where people are coming together to create agriculturally based economic models. So thinking about how might you actually synchronize stories will be important whether you're a consultant or you're in an organization. And as a last teaser, we have been experimenting with using AI art generators to achieve that. And this is an actual image of a workshop that I ran right before the holidays. And you can see here on their flip charts, and everyone works with flip charts, those are actually AI-generated illustrations. And so I'm starting to see a signal that using the technology, which many of us are afraid of, particularly those in the design profession, to actually achieve something more meaningful, which I believe has been the core value of design since its beginning, is bringing people together. And that is why we've written Office Shock. In the book, there is a pullout where we have a quick start guide to help our readers that may be a little bit less sophisticated than yourselves to walk through easily 4 steps to engage in a conversation about how might we transition to a more sustainable future. So with that, I want to thank you, and I hope there's a conversation that's going to happen.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joseph, for the inspiring speech. As I have already pre-announced, I got a lot of insights, and I've already seen, even before, let's say, updating the page, that we have collected 10 questions so far through the digital platform. Let me start from potentially questions that could come directly from the audience, and eventually we will use the backup solution. Anyone that would like to share some reflection with Joseph? Maybe we can use exactly the most voted one.
Early in the morning, Claudia.
Yeah, early in the morning. But let's start from the one that received, let's say, the good portion of votes. And I'm going to read as it is. How to combine the need for cross-pollination among various professionals in offices and boost flexibility and working from everywhere. So basically how we can find the balance between these two tensions. So flexibility, but at the same time guarantee that we can cross-pollinate one each other through the meeting that we have usually in offices.
Right. So I think it's a very important question. And it's fundamental to have that cross-pollination when facilitating change, regardless of what you're changing. It is really about cross-pollination and co-creation. A number of years ago, I would have said design thinking is the way to do it. As I mentioned earlier, my insight and my professional learning has been by starting with asking the question, what is your story of the future? And doing that 10 years out. So at the Institute for the Future, all of our forecasts are 10 years out, plus or minus 1 or 2 years. The reason being is that we don't want to get into a strategy conversation, which is usually 3, 4, 5 years. And we don't want to go to science fiction, which is 15, 20. And so by starting the conversation, by asking what future, we found that it opens up people, number one, cognitively, to be able to not be caught into what we refer to as present forward thinking. We get them to think future back. And also, I have seen that emotionally, by going out into the future, it reduces the ego. It reduces the boundaries. It reduces social identity, okay, which is something that we talk about in the chapter on belonging. So you've got two impacts. You've got kind of head and heart. And I have seen that there is more willingness for cross-pollination, particularly amongst professionals. Every professional is going to have their ego. They are all going to have their professional identity. Listen, I was trained as an architect. Okay? My identity, my ego as an architect was shaped through many, many late nights in the studio. And then I was trashed in front of my professors at Carnegie Mellon. I saw you're going to have a speaker come. And even when I was at MIT, getting trashed by professors, by students, by external reviewers, that's who I am. And it's taken me a long time to overcome that design identity, which is all about me. So I do believe that the secret to cross-pollination, you can think future back, you can work future back, but you're going to have to reflect about who are you, who do you want to be, and what legacy do you want to leave in this great transition to a more sustainable future?
Thanks, Joseph. Questions, curiosity? Otherwise, I will go for the second one that in reality is quite, I have to admit, even sexy or interesting.
All right, that's why you've come here. All right.
Yeah,
I'm ready. I don't have my glasses, so I can't read it.
I was surprised by the word office in the title of the book and your talk. Even more than shock. What's and what will be the meaning of the word office?
So the reason I winced, I feel a little bit of pain, we have received feedback that, oh, office shock. I've passed that book on to the facilities manager. And we're like, no. And that's actually why I'm using this recurring message that, hey, don't be complacent, don't be satisfied that you've solved your workplace policy, because things are not going to get any easier, unfortunately, for the next couple of years. And I'm not being dystopian. I am more utopian. I'm more of an optimist. But the reality is things are going to get much more complicated. On the other hand, what we also tried to do in the book is, and I'm sorry, who asked that question? I always like to, just so I can have somebody to look at. No? Nobody's willing. Boy, this is a very shy audience. It's like with my students at the Politecnico. I ask the question, any questions? Silence. In our book, we try to take this idea of the office as a noun and explain how the physical environment has emerged. That's chapter 2. As a futurist, we look 10 years ahead, but we also look 50 years back. So we do provide a high-level summary of how the workplace has evolved, starting from Taylorism, okay? And that has clearly influenced the way, when I was working, the way that we laid out offices. How many offices can you squeeze into a plateau, in French, of 1,000 square meters? What we also do in the book is try to introduce a new term, which is officing, a verb. Okay? Now, whether that's going to stick or not sure. We're getting good feedback on Officeverse. We haven't trademarked the word, so I don't have any interest in it. But I'm actually more interested in officing as a new way to describe how will we collaborate together to achieve this shared objective. Okay? That's work. There's a really thick book about the history of work, which we refer to if you're interested. But we believe this idea of office physical environment, officing as the verb, how are we working together, and of course, the intersection of the two. So as a recovering architect, I would have loved to have been around in the profession these days and hear clients say, hey, we would love to have a Google-like office. We would love to have an office like the new Apple headquarters for Norman Foster. When I was working, late 90s, early 2000s, nobody said that. So there is a more and more connection between space and thinking, interacting, and that socializing that's happening as we are officing.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joseph. In the meantime, we have received other 5 questions, but probably we share them with you digitally, also because we are getting a little bit late along the day. Yes. But let me thank also from my side, but I would guess also from all the attendees for the interesting speech and even for the following discussion. So thank you again.